Hey there, welcome back to another Permaslug episode. My name is Jonathan, and today what we're going to do is set up your tabs in Oxygen so that they can be linked to. So you're probably familiar with tabs on other websites where when you click them, something changes in the address bar and you can see there's the little pound sign with the name of that tab afterward, which makes it super easy to link to. But unfortunately in Oxygen, you can't do that. So with the help of some custom code and some very slight modifications on your end, then we'll be able to set that up in Oxygen. Now we're going to get the tabs to look like the example on the screen here. So we're going to adjust what you just saw and make it look a bit more like this. And then we're also going to modify that code. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here we are in Oxygen, but before we get started, I wanted to mention that I have the goal to reach 5,000 subscribers before the end of the year. So if you're not already, I hope you'll consider subscribing. I have a lot of great content ideas coming, so stay tuned for that. Now what I want to have happen today is when I click on a tab, like let's say this post tab, I want my URL bar to include that pound sign plus the name of the tab here so that I can direct link to a tab from anywhere across my site or even, an external URL. So when the page loads, this tab is already selected. Now by default, of course, that doesn't happen because when you click a tab, I already showed you, it doesn't add that to the address bar, but we can get there. We're going to change the layout here of these tabs just a little bit. So I'm going to do a couple of things. Over here in my structure panel, I'm going to wrap this tab with a div. I'm going to wrap the tabs container with a div again, and then this tab's content, you guessed it, wrap with div, and then I'm going to stick that inside this other one. If you don't do it this way, then it forces the tabs container and the actual content area to add up to 100% width, which I want it to be less than 100, so I have a little bit of space between the tabs and the content. I'm sure there's a better way that you could achieve that, but this is going to work for our case. So now what I'm going to do is on this wrapper div, set it to horizontal align like this. I'm going to go ahead and set it to space between, which is not going to make much of a difference just yet, but you'll see in a minute what it's going to do. Now on this left-hand div over here, we're going to set this width to something like 20%. Then I need to go into the actual tabs here and let's set them to stack vertically. Then on the right div over here, we're going to do something that would mean that it doesn't quite add up to 100%, so let's go like 75% width. And you can see now there's spacing between those tabs and the content on the right. So what I want to do at this point is basically make the tabs 100% of their width, and there is a little bit of a glitch there. I'm not sure exactly why that is. It's supposed to look like that. We'll see on the front end if that issue is there. I don't think it is. So we need to add some margin underneath these tabs. So I'm going to switch over to the regular class here, so tabs, and then I'm going to delete the margin I added earlier and stick it down below. I'm going to go ahead and set the tab width to 100% so it takes up all the available space. We're going to go over here to the typography. Let's set this to uppercase, font weight of something like 700, and then I'm going to change the letter spacing to like 1.5 pixels. Now in order to center the text here, what you actually have to do is either use margin left and right auto, or what I did earlier was set up a class that I called PS margin auto, and that basically just adds that margin auto for you. So now all I need to do is just click on the text element, go to PS margin auto, and for some reason it looks like it didn't actually add that. So we'll just go down the line real quick and add that so our text is centered. Okay, there we go. And in the example, the tab background for the active class was actually a purple. And so our purple hex color is 8E56E0. So it's starting to look pretty good. I'm going to call that done. That looks pretty reasonable. The only other things you'll notice is on the regular tab class, there is a border. So if I switch over there, it's set to all. But to see what the color actually is, it's RGBA 202, which is essentially just the hex color CACA, and then I just drop that to 50% opacity. And then on the actual active class, there is a box shadow as well. So if I go to effects and box shadow, you can see the box shadow I used was basically just black. Drop that down to 14% opacity, and then set the offsets here to 0, 4, 12, 0. Now the only other thing you're going to need to do is consider how this stacks on your mobile devices. So as the screen starts to shrink a bit, it's going to get pretty crammed. So at like less than 992, it probably makes sense to change your wrapper div here to stack vertically again. So we're almost going to do the inverse of what we did just a little bit ago. Change this to horizontal. We need to go to our container here on the left-hand side, set this width to 100%. What I'm going to do is go back to the tabs here, and then on the right-hand side, I'm going to set the margin to 16. If you have enough tabs that it starts to wrap, what you're probably going to want to do is go to your tabs element here. We're going to go to layout, and then look for flex wrap, and you can go to wrap. And the reason why it's stretched like that is because earlier we set the tab to 100% width. So if we go to one of these tabs real quick and we choose just the regular tab class, we can set this width to something just like auto, and then it's only going to take up as much space as it needs. So now just as an example, if I were to go back to my tabs element and add a couple more tabs, you can see that it starts to wrap onto multiple lines. I'm going to undo those new tabs and we're going to keep going. The only other thing I didn't do here was set this div to 100% width so it stretches the full width of the page as well. So I'm going to do that. And then let's jump back to our desktop screen size. Now let's go ahead and stick a code block on the page here. And then so we can get to it easily, I'm going to bring this up to the top of the page. First thing I'm going to do is go into the PHP tab and just comment that out. And then we're going to switch over to the JavaScript and just paste in the code that you can find at the link in the description below. So this may look a little bit overwhelming at first, but there's really not a whole lot you have to do here. So you're going to need to modify this class right here. And really the only thing that's unique about this is the ID of that class. So if we actually go take a look at our tab here, in our case, the active tab right here is 1086. So you would essentially just copy this, go back to your code block and the JavaScript tab, and you're going to paste this in right there. And then if you look down a little bit lower, you can see the examples here. So this is that # and your tab name. This can be whatever you want. And then it's basically going to connect that particular URL string with the appropriate tab. It's going to show and hide that just with a simple add and remove class. So what you need to do is we added that active class right here. You just need to make sure that you add that right here. So just replace these all the way down for however many active tabs you have. So there's just a bunch of them in this example here. So you obviously just need to go down and replace all of them. So that one is pretty straightforward. Scrolling back up here, you can see our first tab is called account. So let's change this right here from example 1 to just account. And then what we need to do now is actually go get the IDs of that tab. So these are not going to match what's there by default because every time you add a new tabs component, it's going to change that ID. So let's click on the tab here. Switch over to the ID and not the class. Just copy this. So in my case, it's tab 1212. Go back to your code block, JavaScript, and then just replace this. Just keep in mind which one you're editing. Right now, I am editing the account one, so that's where I need to be. And then we need to do essentially the same thing, except now for the tab content. So I'm going to expand this, go to my first tab content div here, and just copy the ID one more time. It can be a little bit tricky to get that ID out of it, but all I was doing was triple clicking it, and I'm able to get it fairly reliably. So next up, the other one was called posts. So we're just going to change that # to posts right there, and then we need to do the exact same thing. So we're going to go to our second tab, get the ID. Usually it goes sequentially, but just double check. You can see this one is 1312. Our previous one was 1212. And then what was our tab content here? So it's 2012. Let's go back to our JavaScript. Once again, I'm just going to replace that ID there. I'm just going to copy this tab content to make it nice and easy. And then I just need to change it from 19 to 20. And then now what we can do is if we go save, let's refresh on the front end. And if I add now the /posts to my URL, when the page reloads, you can see that it now has the post tab selected for me automatically. And just to demonstrate, I'll switch it back to account, which isn't really the best example because of course the account tab is the first one anyway. And you can see it does switch. For whatever reason, we have some width issues there, which we can address. But the point remains that you can see if I switch it to post, it's going to automatically select the post tab. So let's do these other two for downloads and membership. Maybe it's something to do with the video. I'm not sure exactly why that width is there. But we can go ahead and switch back over here to the editor. Same thing, we just need to go to our tabs. So this one's 1412, and then that one is 2112. So in this case, it is going up by 1 sequentially, which makes it nice and easy. So that's 14. And then our second tab content here is 2112. Just be really careful here that you don't accidentally delete the wrong thing or overwrite the wrong thing. But for the most part, all you really need to worry about is these two lines right here. And then of course, just change the # here. In our case, we're just going to be looking for downloads. And then the last one is going to be membership. I'm just going to take a wild guess here and assume that our tab is going to be 1512. And then our tab content is going to be 2212. Hopefully I'm right. And then in our case, that's the end of our tabs. There's an example 6 here, but we only have 4. So what I'm going to do from this point is basically just delete this whole line right here. I'm going to apply that code. Let's save and refresh. And then let's try to get ourselves to the /membership. So all I'm going to do is just change this to membership. So it actually didn't work because this tab I just guessed. This one's actually 4012 for whatever reason. This one was 14. So don't just automatically assume that it goes up by 1 every time. I certainly did and got it wrong. So you can see that tab is 14 and this one is 40. And then this tab content is what? It is 4112. So that's a learning lesson there. So we're going to go to 4012 and then 4112. Not sure why that was, but that's a good example use case for something you might run into. So if we save now, and then I'm going to switch back over here to downloads and just refresh, now the membership tab is active. Just for the sake of example, let's change this back over to posts. And there we go. Now it's going to link up properly for us. I don't know why this width is doing this, but I'm going to try to figure this out for us, and then I will let you know. Okay, so a significant amount of time has passed, more than I care to admit, and I'm glad I wasn't recording for that bit because I was getting extremely frustrated. But I finally found the issue. So we still have that issue where the tabs shrink. And basically what I finally found, the problem was, as you can see, I went backward a lot of steps. I used undo and revisions and all kinds of stuff to figure out what was the problem. But ultimately I found out that if your wrapper div does not have a width set on it, then it will shrink those tabs. So all I did here was set the wrapper div, and you can see I lost the divs that wrapped the tabs and then the content, but essentially I set the wrapper div to 100% width and problem solved. So it took me a very long time to figure that out, but I finally did figure it out. So anyway, this is not exactly where we left off from before, but the point remains that this will work perfectly fine. Just make sure you set a width on this particular div if you're following the tutorial to a T. The principle applies though our code block from earlier. Just make sure you adjust the appropriate areas of the JavaScript. And what I'll try to do here is put up on screen, kind of highlight what you need to modify, and then hopefully that will help you see it if you're not comfortable with this sort of JavaScript code. Nonetheless, there we have the tutorial on how to link to tabs. This is not exactly the most eloquent tutorial I've ever put out, but hopefully in the end, this ultimately gets you to the spot that you need to be. And for me, this works perfectly well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in a future episode.